So today for our daily Moravian text reading, we are in Romans 6 verse 17 through to Romans 7 verse 6. I just want to base today's study on what I think are two key words in the text, two big ideas. The first one is that word dead, and it's mentioned quite a number of times in the passage. Paul says we are dead to sin. He's building on some ideas that we've already read about earlier in Romans 6. And we are dead to the law. So dead to sin, it's a very powerful idea, isn't it? Because as followers of Jesus, what is our relationship with sin? How do we relate to sin? How does sin relate to us? Well, we are dead to it. It's such a complete, absolute, final, past tense type of word, isn't it? We're not dying to it, we are dead to it. And so that means it no longer has a hold over us. It no longer has power over us. Of course, we might feel like it does from time to time, but I think that it's such a hopeful truth, a truth to hold on to, a truth to remind ourselves of when we're struggling with sinful behaviour, just to speak out, I am dead to that way of life. That has no hold or power over me. It gives us hope to live free from sin. And Paul says it's a new idea actually in Romans, that we're dead to the law. Now remember, Paul's talked about the law quite a bit, the law of Moses, 613 rules, the 10 commandments. These laws are good, they are true, but they are the standard against which all people are judged. And because all are judged against that standard, all are guilty, we don't measure up to it, we fall short of God's perfect standard. Therefore, all need grace and all need a saviour. And Paul says as we move into Romans 7, that in the same way that our relationship with sin is we died to it, our relationship with the law, that law, is that we have died to that law. That means we can no longer be judged against it. We've been set free from that judgment because we died to the law. It has no power over us. And the illustration, the picture, the metaphor that Paul uses is marriage. Now, it's a bit of a stretched metaphor. I'll explain why I think Paul uses it in this way in a moment. But Paul says that when a spouse dies, then the person alive is set free from that marital obligation, from that covenant that cannot be broken, is now legally broken, and a person is set free from that covenant. Now, Paul's not going to go and say that the law died and now you're free from the law. He's not going to say sin died and now you're free from sin, because that wouldn't make sense. Those things cannot die. So he says that we died to them. We died to them. And that is why we have been released from them. And Romans 7:6, our reading finishes with that, doesn't it? By dying to what once bound us, we have been released from the law. And Paul is talking about being raised to new life. Jesus died and was resurrected. We have died to that first Adam. Do you remember that from Romans 5? Died to sin, died to the law, and raised into new life. This is the incredible truth of the gospel. It's so simple and yet so profound and so complex. And then the second big word, the second big idea is the idea of control. Control. So when we were alive to sin, we were controlled by sin. That was the nature of our relationship with sin. When you're controlled by sin, the language Paul uses is that we were slaves to sin. You think about a slave master and a slave. The slave is controlled by the slave master. We were mastered by sin. If sin said do that, we did it. If sin said don't do that, we didn't do it. We were under sin's control. We were slaves to sin. And one of the words we could use to understand that is the word habits. Humans are habit-forming creatures. We form habits, habits then form us. We become almost in effect controlled by habits. And what Paul is saying is, because we are dead to sin, we are freed from that slavery of sin, we now become slaves to righteousness. Isn't that an interesting idea? Because slavery seems such a negative word, but this is positive. We are slaves to righteousness. We are controlled by righteousness. Again, control seems a negative word, but it's not a negative word when my kids are young and we're walking by the road and I keep them safe because I keep them controlled. And so I think Paul's talking about these habits of righteousness that form us, not that save us, but form us. So can I challenge you just to review your habits today? What are your habits of righteousness? Your rhythms that help you to walk in the holiness and righteousness that Christ has gifted you with.